You're very welcome to the Locker Room podcast. We've told you each week that we want to get some big names onto the podcast. We've had Bernard Jackman, we've had Chris Ramsey. We couldn't find any big names this week, so we've got Mick Foley from the Sunday Times and we've got Declan Bogue from the Belfast Telegraph. Lads, we're going to have a chat today about sports journalism, and I think it's only right at this stage to have a chat about where the GA is at, how it's changed over the last 20 years, and we'll get into a few discussions like that. So you're very welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Ciaran.
Thanks, Ciaran.
Great stuff. We also have Joe Coulter here. So anyone who's been following the podcast, we got rid of Joe after the first few episodes. The people wanted him back, so we dragged him back in. He was back in for, Joe, which one were you back in for? The Bernard Jackman show, and it was quite popular. And now he's even managed to get rid of Ross Bennett from the show altogether. So Ross is not here with us today, but Joe is back.
Yeah, Ross got the sack. Thanks very much for bringing me back here.
You're back momentarily. You're back, Joe. Just be on your best behaviour, lads. I was quite interested in this one. I've always been interested in sports journalism, but also in ways I think you lads are in a good position as regards analysing games, because you're close enough to the action to get some insights, and you've got access to top players and top managers and the top games. But obviously as well, you're far away out of the game, not to be held back by not giving out what's going on in the game or the PR exercises that often happen and all. So you guys gain a bit of kind of close insight into the game and into teams.
Yeah, I suppose, Ciaran, it's changed a lot over the years, you know. Yeah, like, I mean, I suppose you kind of have to, when you're thinking of your role as a sports journalist, you actually have to think yourself first and foremost as a journalist, you know. Like, I'm sure Declan was the same as myself. I mean, we grew up with Gaelic games and with hurling in particular in our house, and I mean, it's. I always remember my father saying to me when I started in sports journalism, he said, "Be careful that your hobby or your passion doesn't become your job and suddenly become a real labour and something that you don't still love when it's your work." You know, I think there is a lot to that. There is a lot to that, and I think part of the way of sort of distancing yourself in that regard is to sort of, you have to remember that you're a journalist first and foremost, and that, you know, if in the morning we weren't GA journalists, let's just say, that we'd be able to turn our hands to news journalism or business journalism or whatever. It should be the same set of skills, really. You should have the same rigor. You should take the same approach to a story, to dealing with people and keeping distance and all the stuff that you like to aspire to try to do. GA journalism is different in the sense that whatever about elites and about the All Ireland and the big stuff, it's still fundamentally a community organisation, a community operation. And while the proximity, I suppose, of your top players to the people is a lot more distance there now than there was a long time ago, they're still part of your community, and they're still, it's a different kind of balance. But at the same time, you have to sort of maintain that sort of distance and that rigor for yourself. And with that will come, you know, criticism and difficulties with access sometimes, and fallouts and ups and downs and ins and outs. Again, because you're treating somebody's passion as your job, there can be friction there. Sometimes. But I don't know I presume it's the same for you, Declan, or would you have had the same kind of thinking on it?
Yeah, it's just, I suppose, you know, it's the go-to thing for us all in GA journalism, sports journalism, to bemoan the lack of access that we have to top teams, top players, and I think that nothing makes the general public fall asleep quicker than a journalist having a moan about that. But I mean, you know, you trace that back, Michael, of course, to, like, God rest him, Paddy's time in Kerry. Like, you know, Paddy's attitude was ridiculous at times during the years, and you would have had far more exposure to that than I would have. But he simply didn't want anyone talking whatsoever. Like, you know, he didn't want. Then come the close season, he would be all over the papers himself, throwing hot ball at boys and getting his digs in at lads and having a bit of crack and fun. But during the year, he was complete lockdown. I mean, his autobiography with Sean Potts was just full of that kind of stuff. It's not going to let anyone say anything. And then fast forward to this year, and Kerry, in their first few league games after the game, there was no Kerry player put up for interview. I was in Eden Dork the day that David Clifford was red carded against Tyrone, and there's no Kerry player put up. And then, was it Paul Brennan from the Kerry Man was actually asking, is this the way it is now? Because that would be a completely new development. It's been maybe the case with Dublin under Jim Galvin for some years, but the fact is that no player out of a 26-man panel was capable of saying a few words for 5 minutes to a journalist after a game, or could be trusted with that. It's kind of worrying. But as well as, access, we might say, has evolved, or it is, some people would have maintained the same levels going back 20 years. You have the emergence of social media, podcasts, all that kind of thing. There's just a million more elements tugging at a thread of inter-county managers and players and sports people that weren't there before. And then in that, people get kind of precious about their role or their position, and you see genuine, maybe massive scoops, like, say, for example, Dermot Connolly returning to the Dublin panel a couple of years ago, and rather than, it being broken as such by a journalist, the Dubs TV, the in-house publicity channel, just sneak it out in the middle of an interview where Jim Galvin just says his name in the list of a number of different people who are returning from injuries or back. So PR has entered the equation. Access is denied. But for me, the only way to do this and remain sane, I mean, there's no point waiting about for people to land, spuds on your plate. You have to kind of go out and seek out stuff. And some of the more enjoyable things I have done have been where you just go off the beaten path and just say, you know what, you're going to try this guy and see what happens. One of my most enjoyable days over the last number of years in journalism was a day with Darren Hughes on his farm in Scottstown. I did for the Irish Examiner. I mean, just spent 4 hours with him, checking on cattle, watching him do the milking, all that kind of thing. And we just, I suppose Darren Hughes is the other side of 30, and he's probably a bit more relaxed and, in his own skin and all that, and he knows what he is. And he didn't have Monica O'Rourke, parting on his shoulder about, don't talk to anybody. He just says, yeah, come on ahead, and spend half a day up there. Great crack. And it goes back, there's a couple of elements about that too, like the Paul Kimmage thing. He never bothers interviewing anyone under 30 because he's got nothing much to say anyway. And in the main, that's dead right. But I think the crucial element of all that is go out, find your own stuff and make the most of it, because you are not going to get anything truly worthwhile if there is a 24-year-old player sitting in front of you with about 10 other journalists, and them all looking to get their own line or their own angle. They're all operating for a wealth of different media outlets that all have different needs or desires. So that's my fairly comprehensive answer to that.
No, that's great. That's really interesting. Mickey, go on, Mick. Yeah.
No. It was just on the PR, when you're saying the PR stuff, which is reminding. I mean, we're lucky. Look, I suppose I don't go to a lot of those kind of commercial launches. The launches where a player is rolled out and there's a bunch of lads. We've had plenty of dealings with PR companies, and to be fair to them, most of the time they're trying to help both sides, and they can't be caught in the middle. But I do remember interviewing. I won't say who it was, but it was a Dublin footballer of current vintage, a few years ago, and it was in relation to a particular product. Now, I think the trade-off was I think there was a picture of the guy wearing a jersey, or there might have been a little line at the bottom or something. It was fairly harmless anyway. But I remember meeting him at the arranged places, his GA club. So I met him at the GA club. The PR person hadn't arrived yet, so we were shooting the breeze as you do. He's a lovely fella, as you'll find with most guys. I mean, one of the things that's happened, I think, with this distancing is that, I mean, there was social distancing going on between the media and GA journalists long before this. But like, you find that they're absolutely, I mean, some of the dubs are some of the most impressive guys I've ever met, and like really, really good lads, like, you know, really good fellas. But anyway, this particular fella would fall into that category. Grand lad, good, shooting the breeze about this, that, and the other. So they took anyway, the PR person landed in, took the photographs, and said, well, where do we go? What do we do? And I said, sure, what do you want to do? Like, and he said, should we just go up to this bar up the road here? So we went up there, grand, yeah, it was on lunchtime. So we went up anyway and sat in. And we sat in, and it was his local. So we were sitting inside, and these two PR people were with us, right? And this is the first time this had ever happened. So I was like, yeah, how's this going to play out now? So one of them says, well, Michael, this is X, and X is Michael. Have you met before? And I said, well, we just met there about 20 minutes ago in a car park. Like, yeah, it's grand. We were fine, like, right? She said, right, okay. Now, she turned to the player and said, is there anything you don't want Michael to ask you? Any issues you don't want to call out? I'm sitting here, like, and he says, not really, no. And I mean, even in my head, I was kind of thinking, have I, after doing a day and a half or 2 days of research, missed something here?
Yeah.
But I said, no, okay, that's fine. I said, I'm just going to go up and get a glass of water or something. So I said, grand child. He went down. He said, are you getting your whatever, glass of water or something? So anyway, he goes up to the bar, and the other two are sitting there anyway, and whatever look up they give, your man is chatting away to the barman. It's his local, of course, you know, so he's chatting away, and there's a couple of lads in there. And whatever look up they give anyway, she says, there's a mark on his glass. There's a mark on his glass. The mark on his glass? Yeah. Should I go up and tell the barman to give him a fresh glass? There's a mark on his glass. And I kind of went, lads, you're not going up to his local barman in his local pub and saying, give this man a new glass that's dirty. Stall the ball where you are now and sit down and relax. And so they said, grand. So they were sitting there anyway, and the man comes back, and we start chatting. And she said, we're just going to, you know, we won't sit in, but we'll just stay here, you know, basically eavesdropping. So they moved away. I'd say they lasted, this will tell you now about my dynamic interviewing style. They lasted, I'd say, about 10 minutes before they just packed up and headed away. Nothing to see here, like. Bizarre. It was genuinely bizarre. No, that was a very rare, that I have never experienced anything like that. But like that. You don't. I do know that would not be uncommon, particularly in professional sport. But Declan is right. Sorry, I'm going off on a right old tangent there, but Declan is right fundamentally. You kind of have to go digging yourself, and you know it's fine. And that's the other thing. I don't think journalists want things served up on a plate either. I think you just want a natural interaction with people is kind of it. And even that natural interaction wasn't necessarily there. I mean, I'm in this thing. I started this crack in 97, 98. So, I mean, he mentioned Paddy, God rest him. I mean, the thing about Paddy that time with Kerry was, Paddy was such a larger-than-life personality. There was a cohort in Kerry didn't want Paddy to have the Kerry job because they felt his personality would overwhelm the post, and he just wasn't a safe pair of hands. So his reaction to that was to completely subsume his own personality, and by extension, the personality of the entire team. I mean, those press mornings with Killarney used to be hilarious. You'd go over to try and talk to a fella, and he'd kick the ball away and run 40 yards down the field after the ball. Yeah. And you'd be sort of like, I don't really particularly want to be treated like a complete idiot, like, you know, so I'm just not going to come here anymore. Yeah. You know, there's plenty more ways I'll be treated like an idiot during the week rather than voluntarily coming down to be treated like an idiot.
You don't have to leave the comfort of your own house for that either.
You don't have to go outside the door. So
do you feel like for those product launches, for instance, because a lot of the times now you see that players don't come out and speak unless it's for their own benefit as regards a sponsorship event or a product launch. Like, can you feel a bit used in that situation then, that you know that they're there just because they're trying to push their new Avamore milk sponsorship or whatever it is?
I'll answer this one just because, you know, I probably would have been to more of them in the last, say, 5 years than Michael would have, in fairness, right? So Michael's always had that. He's one of the gilded few, the Sunday journalists that, you know, get the steeple the fingers a wee bit and think, you know, for a few days.
I've never been known to steeple fingers. And I'll be put back to that point in a very forceful way when you're done with your role now.
Dr. Evil.
So, like, you know, I was on the Daily Beat for a right while. Like, I'm sort of, I've changed my own working practices, and I'm a freelance for a number of different outlets. But at the time when I was on the Daily Beat for the Belfast Telegraph, it didn't matter what you had in the paper this morning. It was, well, what do you got today? And a lot of the time, those launches were absolutely, and not even going to say unnecessary, but they were manna from heaven. Like, you know, they were just perfect, right? I get to go along, and there's a kit launch or whoever, you know, and then that will do me for maybe the next 2-3 days, because a lot of the time when you're at your own devices, there's an awful lot of ingenuity, thinking on the hoof and generating ideas and just throwing it all out on the day, and then having to just start all over again. So they're absolutely so for the lads that are still on the Daily Beat, like, you know, they're necessary. Like, you know, you just couldn't survive day by day just thinking up of a new idea and having to play that out within the 8 or 10 hours or however long you give yourself to do your day's work, like, you know. Do you feel used? No, because, I mean, you're getting away in the smoke, like, you know, too, in a sense. Like, do you feel it's entirely worthwhile? No. You know, it's just about it scrapes by on a pass mark, you know. Nobody's entirely satisfied. Everybody has the same stuff in the paper, and for those that kind of turn their nose up at it either, like, you know, I'd like to see you operating on the same pressures of producing the same amount of copy under the same time strictures.
Yeah. I'm quite interested, because in some, like, do you think the players and the managers understand the dynamic of the media and the game? Because it makes perfect sense to me, and it always has. If I look at Premier League or whatever it is, that the reporters and the journalists need the players and the management to do interviews, because they need, you know, a scoop for their newspaper, or they need to write an article or analysis. But then the players and the managers obviously need the journalists, because that feeds into the promotion of the games and the lifting and the interest in the media, which is a direct, like, the media is in some ways a direct voice of the people, of the fans. And in ways, professional sports kind of understand that dynamic. But Mick, do you think that the GA, do they understand that dynamic, or they just choose to kind of ignore it?
I think it's slightly more complex than professional sport, because you can draw a fairly straight line between the commercial industrial complex, if you like, of professional sport and the media. You know, one helps to support the other to a large degree. I mean, I'll put it this way: when you look at the Premier League, like, the Premier League teams don't need people coming in the gate. They will get by with their commercial revenue. Whereas if you look at GA, for example, 49% of the GA's revenue last year, for example, came through the turnstiles, 20-odd% came through media. So it's a different dynamic there straight away. I mean, in terms of the GA's relationship, understanding, engagement with the media, we're talking about something. You can go back so long with this, and it's roughly, there's always a tension, because you have a professional media and what chooses at times to look at itself as an amateur organization. At times we're very quick to kind of acclaim the professionalism of the GAA in different regards, but sometimes then the GAA can be very quick to grab onto that amateur thing as well, particularly when it comes to dealing with the media. But I mean, you look back, I mean, there's always been friction. I mean, you can go back 100 odd years. I mean, you go back to the early part of the 20th century, one of the GAA's big issues was the media weren't giving the GAA enough coverage. They weren't getting enough stuff in the newspapers to promote their games. So their response was to they created their own newspaper for a while called the Gaelic Athlete. So, like, you know, you had that at that time. You come forward to now, there's no shortage of space. There's terabytes, yards, hours of airtime, digital space print space given that can be given to Gaelic games if the opportunity is there to give it, if the engagement is there. I think what it comes down to, particularly and we're talking really, I suppose, at inter-county level rather than the local level, is that the media is something that managers can control, or at least they feel it's something that can be controlled, in the sense that if we decide that we're only going to deal with the media on our terms, i.e. I'm going to say we're going to have this media day 3 weeks before, and you're all going to come and you're all going to get your bit, and frankly I don't really care what you get. We're going to give you this 2 hours, and it's not going to be said we didn't, right? So that's one level of it, right? So that's what happens a lot now, and that's fine. I mean, I'm sure Declan's probably the same. I don't particularly get hit up one way or the other. If fellas want to talk, they can talk. The last thing I want to do is to sit down with a guy who's been almost press ganged into sitting down with me. You know, if I get the sense at all that a fella is humming and hawing, I'll pull myself out of it. I'll go, nah, look at your brand. You don't worry about it. Like, you know, if I feel that it's going to be something that's going to be pressing on him, I won't want to do it either, because it's usually not a good result. So it's a difficult sort of a thing. So you have that professional amateur thing all the time going on. In terms of sort of the use of it, I think always and ever, I think anybody who engages with the media, they're not doing it for the media's benefit, I don't think. I think there has to be something coming to you that's of use, right? And in the GA context, that can be quite limited. But sometimes, again, I think as you get older, I mean, Declan mentioned Darren Hughes there. I remember having a conversation, we're talking 20 years ago now, with Jarlath Burns. Jarlath had just retired around this time. Now, it was around 2000, 2001. And I remember Jarlath saying, like, and I mean, for people who may not remember Jarlath as a player, he played for Armagh since the early 80s. So through the knockout, like, there'd be years where Armagh had one match. But he was one of himself, and I suppose the Grimleys, Declan wouldn't have been, and Gerard Houlihan would have been the iconic Armagh players of that era. But I remember Jarlath saying to me, after he'd retired, he said, you know, doing a newspaper interview like with Armagh, you might only get one call in the year. And you do it, and it was almost like a little event in itself, because you know, you did it, and then your mother would probably cut it out and put it away in the paper, and to be something you'd look back on later. And you know, it struck me, and it's often struck me since, and it's something that players and managers don't think of in these terms, and I understand why. But it's a snapshot of someone's life in their 20s or something like that. A really special, rare, unusual time in their life. It's almost like a little time capsule you can look back on if you want to engage with it in those terms. You know, and most of the time, like if you go to a daily newspaper thing, okay, the questions are different, but that's because the demands are different, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you sit down with the likes of me most of the time, it's going to be maybe a different kind of chat, and that's fine too. There's no better or worse than those two scenarios. But just that idea of sort of looking at it as something, well, I'm going to do this now, and you know, it's something and I get a nice picture taken, and my mother will be delighted with it, and I'll ask them, can they send on the pictures if they're nice? That often happens. You'd often get a phone call from the player going, geez, that was nice, could you get the photo, could I get a copy of the photographs? I don't bother at all, you know? So there's little small, what did the fella describe it to me? It's almost like psychic karma. It's like something you can look at the media and some of your engagement with the media, if you're relaxed enough to do it, it's something that's actually, it can do you good. It can actually do you good, but it's not for everybody. And I think journalists, as normal, regular Joes, pardon me, Joe, every Joe is regular, but like, you know what I mean? Like normal guys, we understand. If someone wants to do something, you do it. If you don't want to do it, that's cool, that's fine. I think where the friction comes is when you feel someone is forcibly being restrained from doing something that would be quite normal and natural for them to do, and it wouldn't bother them one bit, and it might actually benefit them.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, Mick, because we spoke back in, I think it was 2015, just before I went to India, and I was involved as the coach with the London senior football team. And that concept of a snapshot of your life is quite interesting. And I have to say, I enjoyed it. You know, it was an enjoyable experience, looking through your career, getting your thoughts on stuff, and also doing a little bit of the pictures and stuff like that. There's a professional photographer, and he's snapping away, and you're like posing, you know, in different ways. I was over in the QPR first team training ground, and you know, it's a kind of a funny but enjoyable experience. And I think it matters how you approach it, and maybe when players retire, maybe they might look back and say, like I certainly did, do you know what? I wish I had just enjoyed the whole journey more. Just in general, I just wish I had enjoyed everything, just relaxed a little bit. And Joe, did you? So your brother, the great Benny Coulter from County Down, how did he approach the media?
He loved talking to journalists. He thrived on it, actually. And you know, he was always on the phone speaking to journalists before big games. And you know, he was always the journalists always, you know, asked him questions and he gave them straight answers. And I think it helped him kind of perform better on the day, because it gave him a little bit of a release too. You know, it got him away from the football pitch, and he spoke freely. So yeah, I think there are players that, you know, that like talking to journalists because they know themselves. It helps them, you know, it helps them perform better on the day. But also, you know, it gives them a bit of, you know, recognition as well in the newspapers, local recognition, and they like that too. So yeah, I think it does help the players.
Yeah, Declan, what do you think about? Because like I was a manager, but a very different situation. So the approach that I took was that media, come our way towards London, because it'll help to build a bit of excitement around the team or around the county, and the promotion will actually help. But on the other hand, if I was manager of Dublin, and like Jim Gavin was and stuff, I wouldn't be as forceful or extreme as his approach. But I might be thinking, well, you know, these interviews are great and a bit of hype, but I couldn't really give a damn about that. And my job is to make sure that Dublin win All Ireland. So I don't really care about this journalist looking for his you know, his hour interview or so.
Now, you know, and most of it all changes due to circumstance. I mean, right now, you could probably lift the phone to most inter-county players right now and ask them if they could do a Zoom call or a Skype with you in an interview, and they will say absolutely, because they're not under the restrictions. They're not in that bubble where they're training 3 nights a week and away for weekends, camps and stuff like that. Right now, you see players popping up everywhere in podcasts and you know, Skype calls with, say, the BBC and RT and all of that. There's no problem right now. I remember actually one time speaking to a player after a game, and it was made known to me by the PRO of that county that they were very displeased with this, because that was not the player selected to be up for interview. And the funny thing about it is, like, I have yet to actually find a player that genuinely didn't want to actually speak. Well, not saying actively wanted to speak to the press, but would have been extremely uncomfortable with it or didn't want. And no doubt some of them do exist. But you go away on, let's say, an All-Stars tour, or you're away, say, on international rules duty or something like that in Australia, you ask a player, can I speak to you? You know, Benny, exactly, for example, was one of the great ones there, because Benny knew that, you know, a nice picture of him away in Australia playing for Ireland, what does that not look? You know, why not? Like, I mean, this is a great thing. But that player I told you about earlier, that this was just this great imposition, then actually a distant relative of them then approached me in a shop then about a week later and said, you know, how much they enjoyed reading, because they'd never seen an interview with this person before. So the family was okay with it and he was okay with it, but just the layers of command and just the role of how people think that what the responsibilities are as a PRO have conflicted completely. They've just got out of hand, really, like, you know. But yeah, look, you know, it depends on their situation at the time. Like Jim Gavin might say there's no need for these people in the press. People know enough about them. They're okay to talk from late September to, you know, middle of January. Let that be the time. It all depends. Personally, when yourself, you know, when you boys were with London, and before that, when you reached the kind of final under Paul Coggins, like, I thought that was so brilliant, like, because you had all these people like the Butlers and Killian Furs and all these Lorcan Mulveys all landing over and playing football for London, and the stories were absolutely brilliant. And to my mind, I'd probably rather read one of those features than if, say, for example, Bernard Brogan was doing his 15th interview of the season. You know, that's all. It's all over. The Bernard Brogan of 2020 season, whatever, you know, has been told here. I want to hear something a wee bit more quirkier, something a bit better. I mean, I'm sitting here in my house, right, and we built it. I sort of took on this with different tradesmen than I knew anyway, right, back in 2015. We built this house, but one of my oldest friends was the bricklayer on it, right? And there was some reason that Joe McMahon from Tyrone, his name came up in conversation, or else he was in the back page of something or other of the Irish News that day. And this guy has no interest in football. He would never go to a football game. But he turned around to me and he says, "Oh, Big Joe, he still likes the Cowboy Suppers anyway." And I said, "What's that? What do you mean with the Cowboy Suppers?" What that was a number of years previously, Joe McMahon had gone to play for Ireland in Australia. He sat down beside Paddy Heaney, who was writing for Irish News at the time. And Paddy Heaney says, "Geez, you know, we're on this flight here, it's 13 hours, Joe. Would you mind we spend half of 1 hour chatting and giving an interview?" And Joe and Paddy sat and had a very agreeable chat. During it, Joe was telling how he had lost so much weight since he was a student in St. Mary's, and how he had knocked in the head this Cowboy Supper habit. And Paddy wrote the piece up. The Cowboy Supper was prevalent in the piece, and that's what your man took away. You know, this guy who doesn't watch any football, he probably wouldn't even flick on the telly to watch a game in full. Like, it just would bore him. He might watch the Sunday game, but his father drew his attention to this piece about this guy who had the guard down and was willing to talk about something a wee bit other than how they think they're going to get on at the weekend. And that's what, to me, that's the magic of GA reporting. I mean, you look at what do people want out of GA reporting now, right? There is the whole forensic side of it and the tactical side of it. That has definitely got a part. But I think in the main, people love storytelling. They love Con Houlihan. They love what Con was able to do and just telling a couple of yarns, stitching a couple of really good lines that he heard in the pub. And I think that kind of style of storytelling never ever goes out of fashion.
Yeah, and I think that kind of links into my next question. And just to give a very quick background around it for listeners who aren't aware. So Declan, to you, Donegal, obviously a brilliant team. Haven't been massively successful down through the years, had one All-Ireland win. Kevin Cassidy was an iconic player really for Donegal, probably just by the way that he played and the character that he is, and he still is, you know, and even his big tree trunk quads and legs, you know, he's an iconic figure really in the game. Jim McGuinness was a young manager and a former player, played with Kevin, I'm pretty sure, and took over in 2011, and they were very successful in that year. Kevin Cassidy scores an extra time with unbelievable booming point in Croke Park against Kildare, I think in the quarter final it might have been, and then they nearly turned over the Dubs in the semi-final. And at that point, then in that winter, then you wrote a book called This Is Our Year. Fantastic book, and I think it, as you said, it's a storytelling book really. And Kevin then obviously did a piece with you or did an interview with you, and was actually quite complimentary of Jim McGuinness and his time with Donegal. But unfortunately, Jim didn't see it that way. And you know, to cut a long story short, Kevin was dropped from the squad. Donegal go on to win the All-Ireland the following year. Do you ever feel any guilt about that, the part that you would have played in that story that Kevin Cassidy never won his All-Ireland medal?
Ballsy question, Ciaran. Anyway, I like the way you put it, and I'm glad we're all on Zoom because I can see Mick Foley's eyebrows just hitting the ceiling and coming back there. But it's funny that you ask me this now, in fairness, because a guy in Gaelic Life, Frank Craig, had spoke to me for an hour about this a few weeks back, and they produced a big feature about it, because it's getting up to nearly 10 years now from when the project was started, which I suppose was the winter of 2010. when I would have lined up all the various different players in each county and the Cavan management, which was amazed that a management team would take part. But then again, Val Andrews and Terry Highland are sort of special people anyway, As part of that, you say about Kevin giving me an interview, the process of that book was just consistently being on the phone to these guys. You're on the phone to them maybe once a week and you're meeting them every 2-3 weeks. It became apparent to me from the start that Kevin's story was going to be something else, because I just could see with my own eyes what was happening with Donegal through that Division 2 campaign. I actually told someone, and I was at a funeral in Temple, where I'm from, in mid-March, and told someone to put a few pound on Donegal to win Ulster, because I could sense what was going on behind the scenes. But so I was constantly in touch, was going up to Guidor every 3-4 weeks or so. That intensified then over the championship. So I got a full sort of 360 degrees picture of what was happening in Donegal. You asked me, did I feel any guilt? All I wanted to do at the time, and I would have spoken to Michael too about it, was the thought behind it was, and people are having the same conversations now as they were then. These conversations of there's no colour in the game anymore. There's no characters. The whole characters is gone out of the game. And you see, people like, say, for example, Joe Brady would say that. And I just think it's the biggest load of nonsense ever. I mean, you can go back over the newspaper, say, in 1992, 93, this golden age where everyone was like Oscar Wilde with their bon vivants and their quips in the dressing rooms and so on. And you go and try and find a plethora of really interesting, revealing interviews in the newspapers. They aren't there, But anyway, this was the point. And what I found was, with all the characters, you had, say, for example, Paddy Cunningham. He was a man who was suffering with a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, and how he was actually finding his way through that year. Aidan Carr, right? This happened to be the 20th year anniversary of Down winning the All-Ireland and his father winning the All-Ireland. Then his granduncle Barney Carr had managed the team to All-Irelands, and yet Aidan was suffering with injury right through that season. So, I mean, it wasn't just Kevin. This was Barry Owens, a two-time All-Star that was being made captain of Fermanagh for the first time ever, a complete hero in the county, and yet all his teammates were walking out, and 11 people walked out in that panel throughout the year. They just kind of didn't treat Barry the way they should have.
And you had Ricey and Dick Clerk and also
Ricey, Dick, Mick Conlon was Michael Conlon was the Derry goalkeeper, but he fell out of favour. So Danny Devlin sort of took up the baton then for the Derry side. I don't think I've left anyone out Derry down. Donegal, no, that was it. And I suppose people can Kevin did his bit the same as any other player, right? Some managers completely ignored it, never looked at it, wouldn't have a notion. One manager, when I rang looking for an interview after giving me a mouthful, and that was okay, because he maybe didn't come out that great in it. And before the book itself, the physical copy of the book had actually reached Ireland. Jim McGuinness had pulled in the Donegal squad and told them that he had read the whole thing cover to cover, and how insulting it was to them, to the different players in the group, and that all of them were banned from attending with a series of book launches. One of them was in Guidor, and they were banned from attending that. There was let's just say a former GA politician that was sitting outside the pub that night taking names of those that were going in attendance from Guidor, which I think is just appalling and pathetic. Jim was the only one that reacted in the way he reacted. And at the same time, Jim and PJ McGowan made their way up to Kevin's place of work, the school that he taught in, and asked him back at Easter time. They asked him back into the panel. Kevin had a thought about it, and Kevin turned it down. I'm not saying whether it's on Kevin. Of course, on the day that they won, and in the final, I was distraught that he hadn't got it. I was distraught that he hadn't got an All-Ireland medal that his career and his efforts for Donegal richly deserved. but there's like, I mean, anytime I ever spoke to him, he assured me that he's entirely fine with this, and we've gone over it in print since prior to going to our meeting Crossmaglen. And just because Kevin holds a different view than the majority of people might, doesn't mean he's wrong. It just kind of marks him out as a bit of a special person, very strong-minded, knows his own mind, knows what's important to him, and sometimes people can get a wee bit freaked out by that, like that he doesn't, his beliefs don't tally with theirs.
Did it work for Jim McGuinness?
I don't know. I mean, in the context of, like, did he win that All-Ireland because Kevin Cassidy was gone from the panel?
No, not that. But for instance, I'm just trying to think from a manager's point of view. Like, maybe it was a way of building a siege mentality and us against everybody else, and we can even do without somebody as iconic as Kevin Cassidy in the team. And it may not be something that he would have chosen, but it could be a circumstance that's placed in front of you, and you say, okay, this is not an opportunity, but it's something that I'm going to deal with and get the best out for the team, dealing with difficult circumstances.
Ciaran, to be honest with you, I have my thoughts on it, but I'd much rather hear your thoughts as a man with the coaching experience you have. And I'll tell you why. The Donegal Dublin game from 2014 was on replay there recently, right? And one thing that I noticed, I think it was Paul Clark had told maybe Ciaran Shannon in an interview last summer, that, when Jim became the Dublin manager, one of the things that he wanted was that when you were substituted, you had to take his hand, you had to shake his hand as you left the field, right? But in that game, that Donegal game in 2014, right? When I was watching it, I was kind of looking out for different wee tells. You can see various players, I'm not going to name the names, but if people want to watch the game back, they will see this. Players are taken off in that game, and they know, obviously, a player's taken off, Dublin player's been taken off in a big game, then the camera goes on them coming off the field, and the amount of head shaking and the body language of them was unbelievable. Like, sitting back then into the stand and shaking the head like, oh, he's got that wrong. And, you could see that Jim Gavin had to take a step towards them for them to take their hand. And then, yet, everything allowed, that defeat allowed Jim Gavin to completely put his stamp of authority on this Dublin team. And then they went on to achieve what they achieved. Now, whether Jim needed a moment like that to do that, I don't know. I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt it, because I think he already had the meeting out of his hands, because they had spent years like a Tyrone and Armagh had their foot on Donegal's throat, and all of a sudden Donegal were top of the pile. So I think that even in his own book, he talked about how he needed to refine his attacking game and needed like an arrow of, you had someone at the front carrying the ball, and you always had two men coming in behind, running an angle to support. And it was that template that they took. And you could see it for the first time, I think, against Derry in 2012 up in Ballybough. This performance that was just unbelievable. I mean, Anthony Thompson spent the entire game running from 21 to 21 because he was marking Conleith Gilligan, who was one of Derry's most creative players. Conleith and I would be friendly, and he says that day, like, Thompson's role was not even to play ball, it was just to tire me out, run 21 to 21 to 21 to 21, and that just annihilated, finished Conleith's game, Yeah. Sorry, I'm way off it, but I mean, you could tell us that better.
Mick, do you want to come in on that?
No, I mean, I can remember, obviously I'll remember it all from that time. I mean, the one thing that I've always thought about the whole, the Kevin Cassidy, Jim McGuinness, this is our year sort of story, is that Declan's book is going to come out of this. It's like, it'll stand the test of time. That's the first thing that has to be said. Like, it's an excellent book.
Yeah. Great
Stories in it, but more than great stories, it gives you a proper insight into the life of an intercounty player in that particular era. Insofar as what happened, that's the first thing. Whatever happens about Kevin Cassidy, Jim McGuinness, all this stuff, like, that stuff is, to me, that stuff is kind of a bit, it's not flittery to Jim McGuinness and Kevin Cassidy, but it pales in comparison to the importance of the book itself and the insights and the quality of the book itself. And I think that needs to be recognised. Like in terms of the Jim McGuinness thing, I mean, the only thing you could say about it is that maybe he felt that after years and years of Donegal sort of getting really close and then kind of skittering off the rails when they're so close to something, he felt that this idea, maybe he saw something in this idea of taking Cassidy's apparent sort of breach of the contracted rules that everybody had signed up to, and saying, right, it doesn't matter who it is, if you breach this thing, you're gone. And that's the long and the short of it. But that only has a very short shelf life, as is reflected in the fact that they tried to go back and get him in Easter. I think what for me, and I don't know whether I should even kind of go here, because I think I think it doesn't reflect well on the man. But like, I think the thing you ask about whether was this a calculated thing from McGuinness, I think it went further, because the very fact that in his moment of triumph after an All-Ireland football final, he walks into a press conference and the first thing he does is ask for Declan to leave. That to me is just absolutely appalling behaviour. Absolutely appalling. It's just on every level. It makes no sense. But on a human level, it's atrocious. And I mean, I wasn't in the room at the time, but like the idea that if this was a calculated sort of a tactic, then why would it still be a tactic half an hour after you win an All-Ireland? You forget that. Like, that stuff really doesn't matter now. But it clearly mattered to him. So we go back again, we were talking before about this aspect of control and controlling the controllables. And that book, perhaps, and I'm speculating obviously because I don't know the man, but perhaps that book and Cassidy's role in that was a breach of that sense of control that McGuinness would have had. And anybody who was involved in that breach of control is automatically, again, you go back, I think always the great coaches are very black and white in the way they see things. So maybe in this, it's just black and you're gone, you know? That doesn't excuse his behaviour, by the way, because we're all human beings and we all have jobs to do. And at the end of the day, I don't care if it's an All-Ireland final. It's a game of football. And going back to the Cassidy thing about not getting a medal, I tell you what, there's plenty of fellas who won All-Ireland medals in Donegal who'll be forgotten far, far, far quicker than Kevin Cassidy will. And that's what counts.
I think it's interesting because if you think of, when you say, Mick, about the control, when you think of Alex Ferguson's career and the difficulty he had with media, like over a kind of a non-story really about his son, and then to hold that grudge with the BBC over a 20-year period. But, you know, at the end of the day, he'll say, well, he's successful and people love Alex Ferguson and probably love him more now than even back at that time. But at times he was a very difficult person to deal with. And Declan, it's interesting when you say about the Jim Gavin thing about the shaking hands with the players and all. To me, that encapsulates perfectly about how managers can have all these different things in their setup about the culture, the environment, the respect, the protocols and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, players get disappointed. Players are happy when they're winning. They're pissed off when they're taken off or they're losing. So all that stuff really matters. But ultimately, it's about, you know, having good players and winning games. And sure, the setups will be great and happy as long as you're winning games, and those kind of protocols and stuff don't matter while you're getting disturbed by your son or daughter, Declan. Oh yeah.
Sorry, boys. Sorry.
No, that's grand. Yeah, so just that point that you can have all these protocols and procedures and you have to shake the manager hand and everything like that, but in the white heat of battle, those stuff kind of go out the window because the player's pissed off as they're being taken off. And I suppose ultimately a winning camp is a happy camp, regardless of everything else.
Winners writing history and all that. I mean, you revert to type like under severe stress, and it's, you know, you see it all the time. I mean, even just say for example Donegal in the 2014 final, like they're trailing Kerry, and Kerry had the football in their own half, like, and Donegal were all retreating into their own half, and they needed to do something. They were so ingrained in the style of play that they just couldn't break out of that. Yeah, so I mean, again, I'd even appreciate Joe's thoughts on that, like, because he's a man who's on the street.
Yeah, I think that if you look at Donegal, we talked about how the game has changed. I think one of the reasons why Donegal won that in Ireland was because of their tactics, because of their defence. I thought defensively, they were excellent, and Jimmy McGuinness kind of changed the game, if you like. He made a revolution there in Donegal. So I think that was the prime reason why they won the All-Ireland. But also I think physically, and when you read Jimmy McGuinness's book as well, and he talked about how he pushed the players to their limits, I think that was one of the reasons why Donegal become so successful. And also just going back, you want your best players to be playing on your team. If you want to win All-Ireland, you want to have your best players there. And, of course, Kevin Cassidy was one of the best players for Donegal. There was no doubt about that. So there was kind of an element of risk from Jimmy McGuinness of kind of throwing him off the squad. Obviously, Kevin had the choice to go back again. But I think if you're doing that, and if you are throwing him off the squad and you think it benefits the team or you think it benefits the mission, well, then you're going to have to do it. I'm sorry for that individual player, but you're just going to have to do it. And I think also maybe some players now might think twice about releasing autobiographies during their playing career. When they're playing for a football team and you're giving information about what happens inside the changing rooms or whatever. Not particularly talking about that book, but just in general. I think managers don't really like that. So you can kind of see it from Jimmy McGuinness's point of view. So yeah.
Declan, definitely. In some ways, like, it was a huge controversy, but as Mick said, it was a brilliant book. Like, I was looking at a review on the Irish Times. It said the book is raw and honest, just like football itself, for supporters who love the game and value a greater understanding of it. Bogue has done some service. This is Our Year is an inspired title, but his book could just as easily be called This Is Our Sport. So it was critically acclaimed.
Blushing here, Ciaran, blushing.
Mick, I have to ask you before we move on, because I know we could talk for forever. I have to ask you about, and I want to get on to the Bloodied Fields, because it's a really, really interesting book. But just ask you about Mickey Harte's book. So you did Mickey Harte's book in 2009. 2009, yeah.
Well, if my memory serves me right, we had most of the book done. And obviously they played Cork in the All-Ireland semi-final, lost it. And then we met, I would say, 10 days maybe after the semi-final, to finish out the end of the chapter. So we had a conversation. I remember that end piece in the book. I remember Mickey saying that was his favourite part. But that last piece of work we did together, he said, was the bit that I think the bit maybe about looking forward and where they were going to go next and stuff. He really liked that, So you obviously, in an autobiography, you try and get it as close as possible to the person. You try and capture that person's voice. Paddy O'Shea's book is excellent at that, and it captures it absolutely brilliantly. Mickey's way of speaking, as any of you that have dealt with him, he's very verbose. It's a particular style, so we were trying to do that. I went in to do that project with Mickey Harte because he was Mickey Harte. He was such an interesting person at that time, and I suppose I was kind of at a time in my life I was kind of thinking, I think spending a year in the company of this man could be a very interesting experience. How he thinks about things, try and get beyond maybe a little bit. And I mean, at that time, Mickey was very open with the media. I mean, and Tyrone was quite an open shop. But I kind of felt, I would just love to know how this guy's value system works and how it all comes together, So that was a lot of the motivation for me.
Yeah, absolutely. We can fall into the trap of pigeonholing people, and just like players get pigeonholed as regards they're a GA player and they have no interests outside of the game and stuff like that. Like, even for you guys as sports journalists can be pigeonholed in that you write on GA teams and you're, very interested in the game coming up or obsessed about this, the championship and stuff. But like just looking through your career and on Twitter and stuff, like Declan, you don't have that you're a journalist, you have that you're a writer on your Twitter profile.
Pretentious, moi.
along with Pink Floyd profile picture.
Yeah, I don't. That's only because I just don't tend to put anything. I've only ever put one picture of myself up on Twitter. I don't have Facebook. That's just a small privacy.
Yeah, no,
issue,
absolutely. But I think the general point, like Mick, I was looking through like the Kings of September, which it won the Irish Sports Book of the Year, and I loved the kind of the mystique around that, and the different characters that you were following, and then even like going on to the Bloodied Field. And I haven't read it yet, unfortunately, but just like I was reading about some of the characters, and like you can tell us more about it, obviously, but 14 Irish people died in Croke Park, and like I can see James Burke, James Matthews, James Tetchin all crushed trying to leave the ground. 14-year-old boy John William Scott died. 11-year-old boy William Robinson died. A good Wexford man, Tom Ryan, and you spoke. I think you spoke to me once previously about that individual. So it's a brilliant kind of story behind that event, wasn't it? And it just hit me that these guys are writers. They're not GA sports journalists. They're writers, and in my mind, there's a difference.
Just before Mick even gets onto that book, Rick, because I think that is the greatest example that you could have pulled out, was the Bloodied Field. And you say about writer there, and I just come back to what you said to me, was there are days that you feel like a writer. There's absolutely days that you feel, there's days that you feel like a journalist, there's days you feel like a real hack. But the best days is when you're sitting in front of a computer and you have something really good and you feel like a writer. What Michael did there with the Bloodied Field is literature. It's not a sports book. I mean, you've got the sports autobiography where I started playing at 10 for the under-12s, and then I was on the McCrory Cup or the Harte Cup team by the time I was 15. And that's all grand, but it's slush. What Michael produced was literature, and given the fact it's coming up to the anniversary this year, I'd urge anybody to get it. And I remember reading it myself first and being tremendously affected by the stories, and speaking to Michael and saying, you probably carry the memory of these people. You're probably linked in some kind of cosmic, and bear with me here, I'm getting California on you here, but he is probably linked to the souls in some kind of cosmic effect. And you don't take that lightly, because at the end of the day, through Michael's work, graves have been uncovered and found, and more of Ireland's history. And to think it was so recently, it's only coming up to 100 years, and so much had been buried or forgotten or, discarded and all that. I mean, people like Michael taking on a project such as that deserves a hell of a lot more than just maybe the royalties accrued from a book. They deserve great credit to their name as people, as historians and writers.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like Mick, there was a number of those people up until recently were in unmarked graves, weren't there?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry. Of the 14 people killed in Croke Park, we say up when the book came out in 2014, there was eight people were in unmarked graves. Now, in the course of the research, I'd found the graves of 7 of them, and found a graveyard for the 8th. So it was there. So that was the situation. When the book was finished, I mean, I can't deny. I mean, I'll be totally honest. I mean, I wouldn't definitely doing something like that, doing a book like that, even before there's any public reaction. It gets in on you, right? It gets in on you, and then I would comfortably say in the 6 years since, there hasn't been a month gone by where there hasn't been some kind of Bloody Sunday related engagement, right? And some of that is great, and some of that is really, it's really good, and some of it can really and I know, and again, I don't want to sound, exaggerating. Things are different for everybody, but it can really it's an emotional thing. It's an emotional thing, and it definitely it hits you. It hits you in different ways. But we had the so there was eight unmarked. I in the back of my head, and it wasn't something that I had actively done anything about, but I kind of have gone, God, at some point I'd love to do something about the graves, or I don't even know what to do really. What do I do? There's 8 unmarked graves, and it upsets me that there's 8 unmarked graves. A year later, in 2015, it just happened that Jane Boyle, who was 27 years, or 20, she was 29 when she passed away. She was in an unmarked grave, and her family had decided to put a gravestone up. So I can't remember which came first, the chicken or the egg, but anyway, we managed to get in contact, and then the GAA were kind of involved as well. So in the heel of the hunt, the GAA ended up helping the family to put the gravestone up, and I was kind of in the mix somewhere as well. And out of that came the Bloody Sunday Graves project, which basically was the GAA helping families if they wanted to put up a gravestone for the person who had passed away. So in the case of those 8, two of them had no family line left. So we had to kind of we dealt with that. Like John William Scott, the 14-year-old, who actually lived right across the road from Croke Park. Like you can walk past his house. I'd say thousands of people walk past his house every time they go to Croke Park. He had no family left, so we put a little kind of a kneeler, they call it. It's like a small little. There was a gravestone. Actually, there was a gravestone on his grave, but his name wasn't on it. That was the thing. So we put a kneeler on the front. But the one that kind of struck me, and it was only recently, we erected 3 in one day last November. One was for Michael Foley, who was an ex-British Army serviceman, who died, and we put up a grave for him. We put up one for Patrick O'Dowd, who actually sat on the wall between the old what is now the Cusack stand and the Belvedere sports ground. But he actually sat on a wall and pulled people over to safety before he was shot himself and killed. So we did one for him. But the third one was for the youngest victim, who was Jerome O'Leary, and he was 10. And I got a call, and again, I mean, I'm involved in this all the time, but I got a phone call one day from Ciaran Murphy inside in Croke Park, who works in the press office. And Ciaran, has been incredible in this. I mean, if we're talking about unmarked graves, I couldn't let the moment pass without mentioning Ciaran. Ciaran has been an unbelievable source of energy and invention and attention and real passion to get something done and to help people. He's been incredible on this. But Ciaran rang me and said, listen, he said, we have no surviving family for Jerome O'Leary. So look, can you, for the purposes of the gravestone, can you confirm his name, address, and date of birth for the people making the gravestone? Which was, that's fine, no problem. But when I was doing it, I was kind of going, geez, whatever it was, back in 2014, I didn't think I'd be here 5 years later, effectively performing the role of family for a 10-year-old who died, who was shot off a wall in Croke Park at a match. And I remember it was a horrible wet day, and all the families had someone to say a few words at the grave, and I said a few words for Jerome. And it was funny, it was kind of like all of those kind of experiences down the years kind of all came together in one, in a way, like for me, that you talk about kind of just the emotional impact of this, that this is what I'm doing here now. And I mean, I couldn't have been more proud or more privileged to do it. And it's definitely something that, again, without wanting to get too sort of people listening going off, for God's sake, but it certainly changes you. It changes the way you think about things. It changes the way you look at an awful lot of things.
Mick, just for people who
experience all itself.
For people who don't know the story, can you just give a quick summary of what actually happened around the event?
Well, essentially on the day, 21st November 1920 was the day. So that morning, the IRA had staged a series of attacks on British spies and agents living around Dublin, and they killed 14. And this is kind of the rawest of raw war. You're talking about guys, young fellas who were barely trained in the use of the guns they had in their hands, going in and shooting people at point blank range in their dressing, like these people are in their pajamas, like, you know, in their bedrooms. So that occurred in the morning. Then in the afternoon, there was a challenge match between Dublin and Tipperary, scheduled for Croke Park that day in the afternoon, football match. It was quite a big game at the time. Dublin were a big team. Tipperary, I always compare them to say Armagh in the noughties, or maybe Donegal in the tens. They kind of just they had a moment. They had a 4 or 5 year kind of moment where they kind of upturned everything that would have ever been assumed about them before, and they won in All Ireland in the end. But this was a challenge match anyway. The game was on. Basically, the police, a combination of the RIC and the Black and Tans, who were a kind of an addition to the police force, who had been kind of, their numbers were down, and then the auxiliaries, who were another addition to the police force in Ireland at the time. A combination of those three went to Croke Park. It was meant to be a search operation, basically stop the game, search everybody in the ground. They were shaking trees just to see could they find out anything or pick anybody up who might have been involved in the morning. But what ended up happening was the first bunch of police jumped out of the trucks. If people are familiar with the geography of Croke Park and the surrounding areas, the Canal Bridge, which is just outside what's now the Hogan Stand, the trucks would have stopped there. They jumped out and they immediately started firing on the crowd. The firing lasted 90 seconds and excuse me, there was 14 people killed. You're talking 3 kids, 1 woman, 10 men. You're talking everything from fellows who work for the gas company. Tom Ryan worked for a gas company. You're talking barmen, bar owners, schoolboys. Jane Boyle worked in a butcher shop. The people came from middle class backgrounds, working class backgrounds, tenements. Every single strata of Irish life at the time was represented. Michael Hogan was killed. He was a farmer below in Grange Morgan, Tipperary. Every single corner. And I mean, the victims are not just Dublin people. Like, you had Tipperary, Wexford, Limerick, Dublin. You know, this was not an isolated sort of a thing that happened to Dublin. So that was the bare bones of what happened on the day, and you know, it obviously resonated in a huge way with people. And I suppose it was a story that was kind of there, but I mean, down the years, the names of the people had been lost, their stories had been lost, the detail of what actually happened on the day, it got kind of distorted and changed. And like, it took me a good 4 years to start to decide, yeah, I'm going to do this. From the time I got the idea to actually starting it, took me 4 years, and it was another 3 years doing it. So if you like, it was kind of a 7-year process of actually doing the thing. But yeah, it was all in. It was all in.
Yeah, it sounds like a big project, a difficult project, but very rewarding as well in the end.
Well, you didn't know, like, you never know. I mean, I remember doing Kings of September, was knocked back by a couple of publishers. I remember going down to the great Pat Spillane, and Pat saying to me, "Sure, who'd be interested in this at all? Sure, who'd be interested in 5 in a row?" And of course he would, like, when they didn't win, he'd say that. But I couldn't. A couple of people said that to me around Kings of September. I said, "Sure, who cares about this story?" And I remember when the Bloodied Field book was done, I was out for a drink with my brother one evening, and a fella came over, and he was kind of chatting away, asking, "How are you getting on? Any strange? No, are you working on anything at the moment?" And I said, "I have an old thing coming out there in the autumn time." "Oh yeah, what's that about?" And I told him, "To bloody Sunday 1920." And there was a pause, and he said, "I'll delete all the expletives," like, but he said, "Who's going to be interested in that? There is nobody going to buy that. There's no interest in that old carry. Ah, Jesus, wasting your time doing that." And he kind of walked off, you know. And you know the way you'd often meet players and they'd kind of be telling you what people say to them in public, and sometimes they'd be going to make one, "There's no way people behave like that with players. That's desperate."
Yeah.
Well, I was like, Jesus, people do actually behave like this.
Yeah.
So you never know. So you just go, like, and as Declan will tell you, writing books is not a profitable exercise. So you go into it. I always say, you started out as a labour of love, it very quickly becomes a labour, and then you hope at the back end of it all that you just do the story some kind of justice, and you just let it off. Then it's a bit like the Mickey Harte thing, or the This Is Our Year bit. Like you just let it off, and you just hope that people find something in it, and you hope that people like it, and it's as needy as that.
Yeah. I love the whole concept around like the Kings of September, where you take an event and you go into the detail about that moment in history, and you get to know the characters, and like at the end of the day, sure, it doesn't really matter in the greater scheme of things, but when you're reading the book, you can go so deep into those characters and how they feel and what they did and what they thought, and it's a kind of fascinating look.
Well, I always said like about the Bloodied Field, and the same applies to Kings of September, that, and I'd say this about books anyway, I can remember saying it to Declan even about This Is Our Year, I'm sure I said it, that you want to feel the dirt beneath your fingernails, like you want to feel that level of sort of involvement and engagement. Because the thing with Kings of September is everyone knows how it ends. Well, most people anyway who picked the book up.
Yeah.
In fact, the second edition that came out had a picture of the goal on the front. So I mean, what's the point in me reading this now? I know the result, but that's the challenge. You know, again, I kind of with that one, that was one of the joy. Like when I look back now, that was one of the joys of my life doing that. Like I was, what age was I? I started that in 05, so I was whatever, 28, 29, you know, no ties to bind me really. Like I was in a relationship at the time, but I had no kids, no mortgage, no nothing. Work was going good, and I was scooting around Kerry and Offaly and Dublin and all points, up to Donegal, up to meet Liam Currans. I remember just meeting these guys and sitting down with them for hours. Like, I mean, I went to Richie Connor's house and we sat out the back for 4 hours, and that was about average. Like, I mean, I went down to Spillane and I came away with 2.5, 3 hours. Like, and you know, they were all really long, detailed. Most of them were very detailed and very engaged and coming back. And I remember I had a list on the wall of all the names, and you cross them off every time you got one. And kind of just gathering all this stuff together, and you go away into the National Library and you'll be going through the microfilm, like looking at the Kerry man. And I always remember finding a picture of they were going on to Kerry did a world tour in 1981 to celebrate 4 in a row. They went to Australia and Hawaii and all these places. But there was a picture on the front of on front of the Kerry man at some stage in 81 of Jimmy Deanahan and a couple of others wearing orange sweaters that they'd been given for their trip to Australia by Uda Ross the Great or someone like that. I was like, what? So, you know, you were kicking over stones and you were finding all this lovely stuff, and it was all true.
Yeah.
You know, there was nothing contrived about any of this, you know, and it was just such a joy. And I mean, you know, of all of them, I mean, the Bloody Field has a certain resonance, the Harte book has a certain resonance, but the Kings said, "Oh, I just pick it up and it just makes me feel good."
Yeah, looking
at it, because it's just, I suppose, the fact that it had been knocked back a few times, and it got done, and I thought there was stories there. I just thought there was stories there, and there was. And that's, as Declan will tell you, like Declan was talking about Darren Hughes before there. Sometimes you go into meet a fella and you don't know. You're thinking that this guy is going to be interesting, but I just don't know. But then when you go in and you realize, oh God, that was absolutely worth the 9 hours I spent on the road to go up and down to see him, or whatever, or the 2 days I'm going to spend transcribing it.
Yeah,
it's a great feeling, you know.
It's brilliant, man. We'll finish up just with a few quick ones. Joe, you were going to ask about it, just a few of the characters you came across. Declan, your children came in probably about 40 minutes ago, and you said that 10 minutes time you were going to be done. So we might have to, there's plenty more we can chat on another day about the GPA stuff and different analysts. But Joe, you were going to...
Yeah, it was just, I think it was more to Declan, you know. I think last night Sean Kavanagh was getting a little bit of abuse on Twitter because he referred to Northern Ireland, or whatever you want to call it, as the UK, and he was getting a little bit of abuse. But it's just kind of the future of the GAA, and you know, there could be a border poll within 10, 15 years or whatever, and the GAA's position, just looking at their position, do you think the GAA should give an official position on a border poll as a 32 county organisation. What's your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting one, Joe, and myself and Michael actually have talked so much about this, and it's kind of personal in some ways, because like I'm going to say a load of stuff that I've said before in other podcasts and in print, but from where I'm sitting in my front room, like I'm looking at Monaghan, like I live in South Tyrone and I can see Monaghan, like I'm right on the border. The town's at McCloy, it's a border town. The club's at Halloo. I help out a wee bit. Well, I was helping out last year coaching, and I'm also involved in a wee bit of underage hurling camogie here too, in a new club that we formed. So I'm right on the border. I know all the sensitivities of this. I even had the temerity to write last year about, at length, a couple of columns about like when the Tyrone team bus was stopped in Atmacloy by an Orange March, and you remember the clip of the some players were singing "Come out you black and tans" and so on. And the point I was making about that was that, you know, this is the Orange Order 20 years previously. When there was marches in this town, there was trouble, there was tension, and there was a threat. Whereas this time round, like, you know, the Orange Order Grandmaster actually waited for the Catholic priest in the town to go into the gates of his house. He got out of the car, and they both waved at each other before they would even start that march. That's, you might think that that's, I'm getting away from the point, but that to me is the greatest illustration of just how far society has moved in a border town, which could be highly contentious and not a great place to live. Now what you see is children, Mickey wouldn't like to use the word kids, from all faiths and no faiths getting involved in the GAA. And that to me is the end goal of it. This is, I don't believe I could walk into a senior dressing room in this club and ask an awful lot of lads their views on United Ireland or a border poll, because there would be sensitivities. There are guys from other faiths and guys who's well, I'll leave it at that. You know, I mean, you know, guys from backgrounds that just would not have countenanced this whatsoever. A generation or two back, now are playing Gaelic football and very proud to play it. It has always been my belief that the GA has what they have in the official guide, the aims and objectives of the association, that they're there, and that's grand, and it's wonderful for someone living in, say, Wexford to say that this is the way we want it. But Joe, you and I both know, being from Ulster, that there are an awful lot of sensitivities and nuance about this. Like, and I don't know if people in the north now truly see the GA look, there are loads of it, and I'm being very careful what I say, because there's a lot of people very happy to jump onto one line and annihilate people for it. I don't know if the GA is a Republican movement now per se anymore. Like, you know, obviously, if you go through The Hurlers, that wonderful book written by Paul Rouse, and the different hijacking of the association by church and the Republican movement off the church and then back again and so on, like, you know, the power struggle for the GA, because it was organised in a county by county basis, and all the potential that it had, like, you know, to be pushed into a political dogma or belief. There are people in this county that would say I'm talking complete and utter rubbish. They just see their Gaelic sport as an extension of their republicanism, and they think that anyone expressing slightly different view doesn't want a united Ireland. And people are very quick then to put you into a pigeonhole you, as you were talking earlier, Ciaran, and saying, well, do you want a united Ireland or not? And if you want to unite Ireland, well then, damn it, you know, we should be singing around the vein before every flipping challenge match, you know, that we play with the club, and you should just get behind this. You know, everything with the long game of a united Ireland is not dependent on everything that you say at that particular time. And I'll tell you what it's not dependent. It's not dependent on whether Sean Kavanagh, a businessman, an accountant from the Moy, uses the phrase up here in the UK or not. United Ireland is not going to depend on what Sean Kavanagh uses as a term of reference. I think that initially when I saw that, I'm like anybody else. Like sometimes you're on Twitter and all that, you see it, and you go, "Oh, he's going to cop some stuff for that." I honestly now think that the pylon that he is experiencing is ridiculous. People need to grow up a small bit, and people need to stop being so insecure about their republicanism and their nationalism. I myself, what I say up here in the UK, I just don't. It's not. It's just a phrase that I use, but I know exactly. Like, I mean, you know, Sean Kavanagh pays into the same treasury of tax that I pay into as self-employed men, and I know exactly what he was going with that when he actually said that Leo Varadkar and the J, and we identify more with them. Maybe that's not exactly the words that he used, but I mean that was the sentiment behind it. That would be my view on it. I don't know. I tend to think that Sean Kavanagh knows his own mind better than most, that he not be affected by that. But I mean, this is this is winter talk on steroids, isn't it? Like, I mean, you know, there's no games on, there's no controversial sending off between Cavan and Monaghan. Nobody's talking about Matty Donnelly's injury. Will he be fit to start in Ballygofay this weekend? So everything is magnified, and just some ridiculous half sentence gets become a thing. I just think people need to get a life a wee bit.
It's disappointing to see like Tyrone supporters and stuff, even people, fellow county people coming out and absolutely slating him. And I don't follow closely, obviously, Northern politics, but like to see Sinn Féin politicians, you know, and coming out and saying things, it's, I think, immature, a bit ridiculous, and surely they have far more important things that they should be looking after during this time than what Sean Kavanagh says is essentially, you know, a correct way of saying what government that he has to pay taxes into. It seems a very strange thing, I think.
Well, is it this uniformity of language that people wish to impose upon you? I mean, I find it ridiculous that, you know, an awful lot of people, I'm not saying there's a Venn diagram where they all fit into the same spot, into the sweet spot of the Venn diagram, but I mean, how many people, when, say, Rory McIlroy would have given some really deep and revealing interviews and said that he is a Northern Catholic who uses the term Northern Ireland and he sees himself as British. And I mean, I remember at that time there's a lot of people who all looked very grown up and saying, well, that's fair enough, that's fine by me, Rory can do that, that's Rory's right. And then Sean Kavanagh makes what some people would say slip of the tongue. Other people might say it was just as he sees it, and others might say, well, it was just more, he'd be used to framing things in that way as a businessman in the North, and then get like agitated about this kind of stuff. I mean, no, go out and take a walk, like, you know.
Mick, we might finish off with one final question, just because we keep taking loads of time off you. And any interview that stood out down through the years, or any character that you came up with, against, either good or bad?
Yeah, just, the good ones. Like, I mean, most, like, again, once a guy agrees to kind of meet you and have a chat, most of the time it's worth the trip, you know. I've had some absolute horror shows. I won't name names, but I mean, I've travelled in times before I had a car and things like that. You know, you'd be getting a bus. I lived in Dublin at the time. I remember getting a bus to a particular place that was more than 4 hours away.
Ulster.
To meet, not necessarily, to meet a fella, and I got in, and actually when I got there I had to wait another 3 hours to meet him, and then I met him. It was 15-20 minutes kind of chatting in his car, and he said to go now, and I was like,
Jesus.
I remember going up another time to another lad who agreed fine to me, and again, same job. Actually met him at a quarry, and again I wasn't driving, so I got a bus to a certain place and got a taxi out to a quarry. Got out, the glamour of it all, got in the car with him, and the man, first thing he says to me is, don't really like doing these. I was like, oh, great start. 15 minutes later, I was calling the taxi again.
Getting out of there.
Like, actually, good. Like, I mean, I tell you a couple of ones that were really good. I mentioned.
You'll name names now.
I went down to Pascalan about 15 years ago. And just had one of the most fantastic conversations I've had in a long, long time with anybody. People have this idea of Pat, and a lot of it is, the personality and that, and a lot of it is based on bulletproof self-belief and sort of sense of himself. But I mean, I kind of, at that stage, that was around 05, and it kind of crossed my mind that people of a certain generation forget how incredible a player this fellow was, and what he came through and all. So that was a good one. Eamon McGee in Donegal in later years, extraordinary lad. A great time for Eamon. I was like, I first time I interviewed Eamon was back in the 90s sometime, and we've sat down 2 or 3 times since. But I tell you what was maybe, when I think of things that go right and wrong and things, it was actually a London interview. It wasn't you, Ciaran, although you'd be up there now, Ciaran.
What? It wasn't in London and it wasn't me. Jesus Christ.
You'd get a B+ now. But what you call it? No, it was over. It was actually the time of the Connacht final, and I had the idea to go over just for a day. I trying to kind of teed up a couple of different people just to get a sense of London in this moment, And one of them was a player, and another chap was a chap called Prunchius Redican. You've probably come across him down the years. Prunchius was involved with Tara Football Club, and he was there since the 50s and 60s. And I mean, I think it was a kind of a situation. His house was a halfway house for lads who landed in London and they'd stay and they'd go on. But Prunchius also was a tailor, and he lectured in tailoring in the London School of Design, or one of these places. So anyway, the way the day worked out, I had to call to the Irish Post to meet a couple of lads there. So I called in there, and as I said, I was in and out in the one day. So I went in and I was meant to meet this player, but he basically he just didn't answer his phone. He texted me in the morning, we were ready to go, but he let me down. He just didn't answer his phone, couldn't find him. So I was like, okay, I better hightail it to Prunchius' house. So out I went anyway, and in I went this lovely, lovely man from Leitrim and his wife, they're both in their 80s. He had the radio tuned to Shannon side, and he had all little bits of memorabilia, and we sat down, and it turned out like he was a tailor on Savile Row in the 60s, like in the swinging 60s, right?
Yeah.
But he was the kind of guy, he'd be gone to Kilburn for the pints, he wasn't interested in the cocktail parties, even though he went to plenty of them. He just wasn't interested. But he was a guy, he made suits for the Beatles, he made stuff I think for George Best. He worked with like some of the best people, and he was such a lovely man. He was kind of a bit bashful almost about talking about the Beatles stuff. But he went out at one stage, and his wife was there, and I said, guys, he's very shy about talking about the Beatles. Oh, sure, he made suits for the best of them. He said, and she told him, she chatted away then for a little while about it. It was just a lovely conversation, boiling, roasting hot day. Went back up, got the tube back, got the plane out, went home, just wrote a piece about Prunchius. It won a McNamee Award that year, and I kind of look back, and I go back to the very start of the conversation. What Declan said about, you kind of have to make. I'm not saying anything exceptional that I did there now. That was all Prunchius, but my point is that I think journalists as a breed are very resourceful, or they have to be very resourceful. And when stuff that was a certain way changes, we have to change with it, whether that's on a day-to-day or on a bigger kind of industry kind of level. But like, you kind of go with the flow and you go with the punches, and all you're trying to do all the time is reflect a story that you hear in the best way possible, in the most accurate way possible. And some people will like that. More people will disagree with you. Some people will think you're the worst specker they ever came across when they read it, whether they never even met you before or not. And other people will go and try and find you every day, or if they see something, they will read it. And that's just the nature of it. But yeah, like those words, and in all those cases, I'm sure Declan would say the same. When you sit down with somebody and you just come away with that little sense that you feel better even about yourself, you feel better for having that conversation. it's that organic, it's that intuitive, it's that basic. It's two people talking to each other, and I'm asking you to tell me your story, and you're telling me your story, and you're happy, and it's just a good feeling for both sides, and you come away. And there's very little in professional life, I think, can beat that sense of satisfaction, you know.
Yeah, just to say that, Mick, you know, give two examples of that when that happens, because he articulates it so well, like, you know, and it's happened to me a few times, and I don't know if it will happen like dozens of times in your career, but, you know, maybe once or twice a year you do that, and it just really takes you back. I mean, I remember speaking to Johnny McGuinness, the former Derry player, in 2018. It was just the week after, you know, the Derry team of '93 were honoured, and Johnny had developed, like, in recent years, he had developed a serious chronic gambling issue, and he had defrauded his employers, and he had went to prison, and like his whole life, like, he lost his family, went to prison, spent, you know, time there, and we sat down to talk, and he knew what I was going to say, and, you know, after about an hour, then we got talking about it and his problems in life, and, you know, Johnny was crying and I was crying. I mean, it was just an unbelievable experience to be part of that. When someone actually, who probably never really heard of you the week before, when they get a phone call asking, can you let me come into your life and get into the most horrible crevices and some of the things that you've done, and you'll share that, and I will present that then in a newspaper for the world to see. And that then, you know, driving home, you know that, wow, this is I need to handle this right, and you spend ages at it, and it just takes over your life for about a week, you know, a piece like that, making sure you get it right, and then it gets published, and then, like, you know, the happy thing is when Johnny tells you that the day it was published, hundreds of people got in touch with him, you know, from his playing career, people who didn't even know him, people who are looking for help with their own issues. And then you recognize, you know, there's so much good came out of that. Even now, like, you know, then they're the kind of people then you would maybe keep in touch with, send the odd text, chat to, see, you know, meet up with. And, like, as Mick says, the most rewarding thing, like, it is. I don't know how much longer we're all going to be at this. That sounds fatalistic and sad and all the rest. I don't know. But at least for people like myself, Michael, that is the best occupation you could ever be involved in. It's just so rewarding at times.
Yeah, okay. It's a brilliant way to finish. Lads, for anyone out there, I'd recommend during this time especially go out and buy. So This Is Our Year from Declan and from Mick, and I'm sure there's others, Declan, and from Mick, then the Mickey Harte book, Kings of September, and especially The Bloodied Field, which I must pick up myself and have a read during this period. Thanks for coming on. It is over an hour and a half, I think, and we didn't even touch, Mick, on all the other Joe Brawley and Colm O'Rourke and your friends in the media. So that's going to have to wait for another day. But look, it was brilliant to have you on. I feel myself, it's a fascinating subject. I really enjoy it, and I love talking to some of you guys, because it's not just about the game and the upcoming match at the weekend and stuff like that. It's proper writing and proper journalism, and the stories. I think you're storytellers, and that's why I'm so interested. Joe, thanks for coming back on. We'll keep Joe Coulter with us anyway on the podcast, and just head over to the website dailysportscience.com just for anyone to see there's plenty of offers there, loads of stuff going on. We've started a new hurling section as well, so there's new drills and games going up there from Barry Milan. So Declan, we'll have to get you up on it there as well. But lads, Mick and Declan, thanks very much for coming on. It's brilliant having you.
No problem.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.